Yeah, one call here yesterday and another call.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome. Good to have you all with us for Bible study. My class is coming in. Hello, somebody has joined us. Welcome. The class is coming in and joining us. I have completely thrown them all off because I'm sitting in the wrong place. One, and I added another table in here and made it bigger for all of us. So there's more space and there's more room for us as well to be able to. Can you see me?
You're so far away.
Hello. Hello. There's 3 folks online. I'm sure. I bet. Well, I'm thinking that maybe since Paul couldn't be with us in person, that maybe he's on. Rich is online. Good old faithful Rich. Hi, Rich. Sitting with me around the table, I have Neil and Gail tonight, and Dorothy and Karen and Joe. And then it looks like Rich is online with us, so that's always great. I'm thinking maybe Dennis and Joanne might be out there, and maybe Paul too. So welcome. We are Paul Gotenauer is online. Hi, Paul. We hope that your surgery went well. The fact that you're watching us is good since you had eye surgery. Hi, Captain. We are on our penultimate time together. That means the second to the last one. We have the Passion tonight we are talking about. Then we'll talk about the resurrection in Mark's Gospel and the shorter ending and the longer ending of Mark's Gospel. Before I forget, and I'll say it again at the end, that we do not have Bible study next week. Next week, no Bible study. We have instead second Wednesday here at church, which is a meal together, and then prayer around the cross, which is Taizé style worship. You're welcome to join us. We start at 6:30. Dennis and Joanne are online. Hi, guys. We are. Mm-hmm. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. But I see four little people up there. So I think there's one more out there because I'm thinking Dennis and Joanne are like watching together. That's I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe their comfy chairs are in different places. What do I know? So the upshot is that we have Bible study tonight, and then in 2 weeks, and then we are on break until after the new year. I know it's a long time. But we'll take all of Advent off. There's enough stuff going on in the season of Advent, gearing up for Christmas. We'll give you a little space to do those things. So just tonight and 2 weeks from tonight for our last 2 sessions on the Gospel of Mark. So tonight we are looking at what are we looking at? The Passion. Thank you. We're looking at the Passion. And that's in chapters 14 and 15. Long chapters, though. Really long chapter, right? 14 and 15. So as I'm gonna move you guys just a little bit. There. As we get ready to start, you read through the Passion perhaps this week once or twice or 10 times. however many times you got around to it, right? What did you, oh, Mr. Goldsworth he's ready to go again.
Aren't I, dear?
Okay, so Mr. Goldsworth has a question. Yeah, no, a comment.
The Pharisees knew who Jesus was. The Sadducees knew who Jesus was. All the priests knew who Jesus was. And all these minions that went out there to get him worked for these people. Did they really need Judas to point him out?
Isn't it interesting? Right? Why did you need that?
I don't, because we had to fulfill the prophecy that somebody was
You know,
going to betray him.
Yeah,
But
maybe
that-
they didn't all know
Well,
him.
I agree. Some of them did because these looked like these were the enforcers that they sent out with clubs and swords. But
Yeah.
still,
Yeah. Well, they may not have known because there were a lot of. So what we have to remember is Jesus comes in to Jerusalem during Passover, a time when loads of people are coming into Jerusalem for pilgrimage time. All right. Lots of foreigners. Simon of Cyrene, a character we're going to meet, he came all the way from Libya. That's where
that's a long
Cyrene.
walk.
Yeah. That's where Cyrene is. And so it's not even on our map. Our great new map here.
Well, I see where you're headed, but it just
So it's quite possible because he was having all these debates, not with the chief priests, but with all these other people, right? So the minions. And remember that it was contrived in the sense of Mark didn't, all of those, the stories that we did yet last week with the coin and all of that, Mark puts those stories as happening in the last week of Jesus's life, but indeed they may not have been, right? So it's quite possible that they didn't know, but it is
questionable.
It's interesting though what you pick up on when you've read the whole thing all
exactly.
at once, right? So I like what you're thinking. Did you have something else too?
That's all I have for this.
Oh,
at
that's-
this present time.
That's you rest for
I
now.
rest my case for now.
For now.
For now.
Anyone else have anything that they noticed?
I yield to whoever.
I
I yield. my
I
time.
yield the remainder of my time to the good disciple.
Well,
From
I have
Chardon.
a question, but you're going to be doing it at the end, so I'm going to save my question until then.
Okay. Do you want to give me your question so I make sure I answer
Sure.
it?
In 1540, some
Uh-huh.
women were standing at a distance from the cross watching. Among them, Mary Magdalene, Salome, and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph. James was her youngest son. Why isn't that Mary, the son of Jesus? I mean, the mother of Jesus.
Yeah.
And then later it says, and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw the place where Jesus was laid.
It's interesting you should bring that up because I tried to find out about who
Oh,
was
okay.
this Joseph guy, and I couldn't. Nobody wanted to comment on that in the. So I'm not sure I'm gonna get to that.
Okay. You know, I don't know if they had a son named Joseph, but one of Mary and Joseph's sons were James.
Yes.
And because Joseph was the first, you know, that probably is. But why didn't they include Jesus?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, why wouldn't you just say and
Right.
Jesus' mother?
Mother, right?
Right. Mary was a very common name, and so I don't really have an answer for you, and I'm not sure
You
that
know she'd have
anyone.
been there.
But her name wasn't really Mary in that language they spoke, was it?
In
Aramaic or whatever.
in Aramaic, would it have been? I think it would have been something pretty
Think so?
close.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and this could have been
Well, they
another Mary.
Oh, so many Marys, right? Mary Magdalene, right? And the other Mary.
But you know that the mother would be there.
Yeah, if she were alive, right?
If it was possible.
Well, from the cross, he gave her to John. So maybe
That's in John's gospel.
Oh, yeah. So maybe
That's in
she
John's
wasn't his mother
gospel.
anymore. She was
which
John's
was-
mother.
Yeah, yes, right. But that happened in John's gospel, and John wrote his gospel 40 years later, maybe even 50 years later. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else that you noticed or want to comment on or want to make sure that I comment on?
Well, when I was reading that section, my first thought was that's not his mother. It just happens to be
Another Mary?
What's
Mary that has
what's
the-
your note say there?
Whether Mary, the mother of James and of Joseph, is the same woman as Jesus' mother is impossible to determine.
It's in that Bible, so it must be true.
Oh, well, then it must be true. It's in the Bible. It must be true. All right. Well, let's start. I'm going to grab one of these papers because I want to see how I have it organized for you guys. Because the way I have it organized for me is really unorganized. The first thing we're going to start with is, we're going to start at the beginning of chapter 14. And it's a very good place to start because when you read, you begin with ABC. So starting at 1, you know how Mark loves these sandwiches, right? 2 blind guys on either side of what it means to be a disciple, right? Jairus's daughter on either side of the hemorrhaging woman. Well, chapter 14 starts out with opportunities, because the first is that when chapter 14 starts out, the religious leaders are looking for an opportunity. And then down in 10, Judas is going to start looking for an opportunity. So you have these people who are looking for opportunities to do Jesus in, to betray him. And these are around this story of a woman who took a completely different opportunity in terms of Jesus. She took the opportunity to worship, whereas these other guys on either side were looking for an opportunity to betray. So it's really fascinating to me because this is a Neil Goldsworth observation, but he didn't get it. Verse 2 says that they were looking for an opportunity to kill him, but they say, but not during the Passover celebration, and yet that's exactly when they nab him.
Mm-hmm.
Is during the Passover celebration, or the people may riot. So I guess they end up oh, wait a minute. What did Paul say here? Paul, the thing that Paul noticed in the story is that both bandits here taunted Jesus. Instead of in the Luke account, right? One's on Jesus's side and the other isn't. And here, both bandits. Yes. So we have this interesting sandwich here of people looking for ways to betray Jesus, Judas and the chief priests, and then a disciple who is looking for a way to revere Jesus. And so you get this story of the woman who came in with an alabaster jar of expensive perfume and breaks it. So some interesting things, speculations about who is this woman? Who might this woman be? So maybe it's the hemorrhaging woman, the one that I just mentioned recently, the one who reached out to touch, because she also falls at Jesus's feet once she gets caught, right? Once Jesus is like, "Who touched me?" and she finally fesses up and falls at the feet. There's also the quick-witted Gentile woman, the Syrophoenician. Remember her, who with the crumbs, right? Everybody else, there's all this bread and they don't get it, but she seems to be satisfied with only crumbs. And she too falls at Jesus's feet. So it could be one of these women, or it could just be that Mark repeatedly shows that the people of faith are these people on the outskirts of society, not just women, but people who are on the fringe, right? It's not the powerful ones. The ones who seem to be getting it in Mark's gospel are the powerful ones.
I wonder why he felt like he had to add Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon, who had a skin disease while he was eating there.
Yeah. So there's some speculation about who this might be, and it's quite possible. The only leper that Mark mentions is the very first healing story back in chapter 1, verse 40, when he heals a leper.
Who had a skin disease. Oh, he doesn't
Had.
have it. Oh,
He had a skin disease, right?
Oh, okay.
So maybe
I mean,
that's
still in those days he would still been known that well, he probably would be today.
right. Yes, right?
Yeah,
Bill the drunk,
yeah,
right? Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, even if
yeah.
Bill has been sober for 40 years.
This one doesn't say he was cured. It just says the house of Simon the leper.
Yeah, but it says had rather than has.
Not this.
Mm.
this
Oh,
is,
you just have Simon the
Mhm.
leper.
Mhm.
Simon the leper.
Oh, okay.
Now, of course, Mark takes this opportunity with the woman with the alabaster jar and has a little foreshadowing, right? She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. So that's just good narrative writing to have the foreshadowing there. And so now, she's going to be remembered and discussed. And here we are, 2,000 years later,
Still discussing her.
still remembering her and still discussing her. And the incredible gift that she gave, especially in contrast to Judas's betrayal. Was he after money? There is some conjecture that he was the purse keeper for the disciples. He was the treasurer, and so he was very concerned about money. This, it doesn't seem like when Judas is looking for this opportunity that he's going looking for money. He doesn't say, "Hey, will you pay me?"
Mhm.
It's only after he goes,
They all-
he goes and says, "Hey, what do you think?" One of the more plausible thoughts on this is that perhaps Judas was a zealot, and at this time there were a bunch, or I think the word is a scari or a Sakari, I think, and they're knife wielders basically, and they wanted to overthrow the Roman government by violence. And there's some thought that maybe Judas was a member of this group. And so he wanted to he didn't want to betray Jesus so much as to force Jesus's hand. So like if they came after him with clubs and swords as they did, then Jesus would be forced to act, right? And in the end, that backfires on Judas.
Judas, yeah.
It backfires. Here, Mark does not want to let Judas off the hook at all. In Luke's gospel, after the devil had tempted Jesus in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, Luke writes that the devil left for an opportune time. And the devil doesn't return again in Luke's gospel until he enters into the heart of Judas Iscariot. And then Judas goes to betray him. Here, none of that, right? Judas has barely been mentioned. And then all of a sudden, here he is. And it is pretty clear that he does this on his own. It's he can't say the devil made me do it. Right?
Footballs.
Yep.
Now, when reading this, one of my thoughts was he didn't want to be one of the ones who was persecuted.
Oh, so
by handing over Jesus.
So you read it as him saving his own skin.
Yeah.
Ah, interesting. Interesting.
But then I know I'm interpreting it.
Well, it's all interpretation, right? It's an ancient text. All reading is interpretation. Because a word only means what we think it means. Yeah. So then we move from there into the Last Supper. So here, it's important to remember that the Christian community took over the Passover meal for itself. That our Eucharist, our Holy Communion, is a Passover meal. And the Passover meal was a remembrance of God's deliverance of God's people. It still is for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is God reaching out and forgiving us. So it's still a meal where we remember God's steadfast love for us and deliverance of us. Just not with a mighty arm and an outstretched, just not with a mighty arm. Yes, with an outstretched hand, but not with a mighty arm that pulls back the water. And then notice in this section how much detail. So much. So Jesus sent two of them into Jerusalem with these instructions. As you go into the city, a man carrying a pitcher of water will meet you. Follow him. He will give you a secret note. You will read the note. Right? That's not in there. At the house he enters, say to the owner, the teacher asks, where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples? He will take you upstairs. You will shake hands with the secret sign to a large room that is already set up. That's the place. X will mark the spot. For Mark,
For him,
That's
yeah.
a lot.
that's a lot of detail, right? And then they find everything exactly like Jesus has to say. So we're supposed to take note of this, that somehow Jesus, did Jesus know this ahead of time, or did Jesus set something up? Which is probably more, right? That Jesus had a prearrangement with someone. So then we get to the meal itself, and Jesus arrives with the 12 disciples. Judas is still there. Judas is going to get to be part of this meal. Some of the gospel narratives have him leaving before Jesus blesses, breaks, and gives. Go and do what you must do in some of them. But here, Judas stays
Because he went and did it
through
early.
that
He
meal.
already did it before.
But I think
Only
it's
there's
theologically, I think there's a theological reason here that Judas gets to stay.
I wonder how he felt when Jesus said, "One of you will betray me."
Yeah, he's
And the
probably
others
like,
say, "It isn't me, is it?"
yeah. Well, and you know,
Yeah.
each one asked, "Am I the one?" Right? And it could be that Judas didn't think that he was betraying him, right? I'm not betraying, I am
Yeah, he did
forcing your hand.
I don't know where I get the idea, because I've seen so many different things and I've read so many books, but that he never expected him to be beaten and killed.
Yeah, well, because we'll talk a little bit more about this, but the Jewish authorities they couldn't put anyone to death.
Yeah.
That was not because of the Roman occupation. They could not do that. So Judas is present there, and I think there's a theological reason that Mark does that, and that is that even betrayal finds a place at the table, which is quite something to think about. Then, of course, we have the same 4 verbs that we had back at both of the feeding of the 5,000: take, bless, break, and give. And we have that institution of the supper. Then we have some disappointments that crop up here. The first disappointment is that you are all going to desert me, right? And but look at that in 28. You're all going to run away. You're all going to leave me. But after I'm raised from the dead, I'll go ahead of you to Galilee, and I'll meet you there. So even though you all are going to run away and desert me, I'm still going to be faithful to you, right? Then good old Peter, right? He, bless his little heart. He is always like first. He's like the teacher's pet, right? He's always that first one, and he's blurting stuff out like our reading from worship tonight from the Transfiguration. Oh, it is so good for us to be here. Let's build some tents, right?
I will even die with you.
Yes, and here, if everyone else leaves, that's their business. But me, I'm going to stick around, and I'm going to be right here. I will never ever leave you. No, really, Peter. No, Lord, I alone will be faithful to you. of course, everybody else has to chime in then too, right? Like, oh, no, we're good. We're going to stick around. So that's one. Then the second one is here we have Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And once again, he gets a little, he's disappointed. Look at this. He takes the three same guys with him, though, Peter, James, and John. I wonder why. Like,
And he took them to the Mount of Transfiguration.
yes.
They were the teacher's pets. 3 of them.
Yeah, the three. Maybe they were like, Larry, Curly, and Moe. You just couldn't separate them. Yes. Or Dorothy, Joe, and Karen. They are the Three Stooges. So that's really interesting. And this whole exchange here really shows that Jesus was, here, at least this translation I have here, my soul is crushed. My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Many commentators will point to the fact that what made Jesus so incredibly special is not that he went, quote unquote, willingly to the cross, but that he said, your will be done, not mine. I want what you want. Now we have to pause for a moment. I do not think any more than God wants any of you to suffer anything. Do I think that God wanted Jesus to suffer anything? Right? I still firmly believe that God works through all things for good for those who love him. And that God wants what is good for us. And a painful execution is not good for anyone. But God worked through it to bring about good. And so to say it was God's will for Jesus to die, or to say that that's what God wanted, is not exactly how I would put it. I would say that that's the way things were going down. God was working with the hand that God was dealt because, well, people suck.
Well, the prophecy had to come true for people to start to believe it, didn't it?
I'm not sure about that. God is God. God can do whatever God wants to do.
But our self-will may not let us follow.
Right. But I think that there are other ways besides,
Suffer.
yes, that God could have figured out, right? And I think God probably had a different plan in mind, but then people suck. And so then God had to punt. So I'll go back to, remember Moses, of course, right? And God goes to Moses and says, hey, Moses, I want you to go to Pharaoh and I want you to free my people. And Moses is like,
Who, me?
who, me? Like, what? And God's like, yeah, you. Well, why are they going to believe me? And God is like, good question. Well, you tell him that I sent you. And Moses is like, that's not going to do it. And God's like, all right, I see your point. Tell them I am sent you. That I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses is like, I don't speak so well. God's like, what? Moses, like, no, seriously, I do not speak well. you're going to have to give me a helper.
Poor Aaron.
God's
Okay.
like, what? Like, I'm telling you, you can do this. I'm the one. I created the universe. I'm telling you, you can do this. And you want to help her? Yeah, I want to help her. Fine. I'll give you a helper. How about Aaron? Yeah, he'll do. So God had this great plan in mind, right?
Mhm.
Moses, go, right? And then what ends up happening? But Aaron gets them into trouble out in the desert, right? He's like, all right, Moses, you asked for that Aaron. You got to go down that mountain and fix the mess he's made. You asked for him. I think God punts because people suck. And so God has this great plan. I had this whole Trinity dialogue today at noon. You'll have to ask the Sheltons about the Trinity dialogue at noon today. But I think that they had this whole great plan. And then the two that were left up there saw what was going on to the one on the bottom and the on Earth and went, oh, crap. We had such a good plan. This is not going to end well. And that's when God the Father goes, oh, wait, I got something in my back pocket. Resurrection, right? And the Spirit's like, yeah, that'll do. Yeah, that's the ticket, right? So I think that now, for those of you watching, for those of you here, there's a lot of scriptural evidence for this was the will of God that Jesus came to die. This is a lot of how it was interpreted afterwards through Paul and the other epistle writers. I totally get that. I just don't have to buy it. There are other ways of understanding the Jesus story than atonement theory. And one of them is that God works through all things for good for those who love him. Because if God is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, there's no way that somebody gets sent
Be crucified
to die
without human
without,
getting in the way.
yeah.
To
Yeah.
have it happen.
Yep.
I like that theory. So much more than the one I was taught.
Yeah. Well, atonement theory has, has become the predominant explanation of the Jesus event, the Christ event. But there are other ways of understanding it. So that does not mean that one is right and one is wrong. One just doesn't work for me. It might work for you. For you. All right. So that those are some disappointments there. Then we get to the arrest and trials. Yes, that S on my paper is on purpose because I think that not only is Jesus on trial, but Peter is on trial as well. So, right there in 1443, and immediately. So Mark is moving things along, even though things have slowed down pretty much here. Even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12, notice that he's still included. He has not been, Mark still is keeping him in the fold of the disciples. Arrives with all these clubs and right, and then Judas gives them this sign. Now, I need you to look. I need you to look, or to remember way back to the family reconfiguration that Jesus did. Remember when he said, who are my mothers and my brothers, right?
Yeah.
And then he redefines those who do the will, right? And he basically turns his band of merry men and women into the family, right? And then if you remember that signs of affection between brothers were common, kisses, right? And now Jesus and Judas are brothers in this new system. And brothers stick together in ancient culture, Middle Eastern culture. Brothers stick together. And here comes Judas and betrays him with a kiss. Now, this, for us, the depth of that betrayal, we don't quite get because we have falling out with our siblings or know people who do all the time. In the ancient Mideast culture, you wouldn't do that because this is the person that's going to take care of you in your old age. Like, you need this person. And so the depth of this betrayal it's deep. And then verse 50, of course, then all his disciples deserted him and ran away.
But one of the things, because we said this was to come in this my Bible, it says all these things have happened to make the scriptures come true.
Yes. So that's an editorial comment from Mark, probably, right? Mark loves his.
Yeah. But he has it as though Jesus said it.
Yes. Yeah.
And he didn't give Malchus' name.
No, Malchus doesn't get his name in here. No, he doesn't get his name. I think that's
He
in.
did get a book later.
Yeah. I think Malchus is named in Matthew's gospel. Yeah. We're gonna put a pin in verses 51 and 52. At this point, I just want you to remember the guy who was so scared and ran away so fast that he left his clothes behind.
It says, and the people also grabbed him, but the cloth he was wearing came
Yeah,
off.
he wanted to get out of there so bad.
Following Jesus.
Yes. So I just want to put a pin in that, but I want you to remember him. So then Jesus goes before the council, right? So they go to the high priest's home. Now this is at night. They did not meet at night. It would have been illegal for them. Like, this isn't a properly called meeting. You did not meet at night.
Well, this would have happened Holy Thursday, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Thursday night into Friday morning. So then you had to have, in capital cases, you needed to have a majority of 2. So you had to have at least 2 people saying the same story. But they don't have that. They have false witnesses standing up, but nobody's story is matching
Nobody
up.
agreed.
Nobody is agreeing.
Sounds like politics.
Yeah. And then, so they have false testimony. So here again, temple destruction talk, right? But they couldn't, even those stories didn't agree, right? So then the high priest decides to stand up and he says, well, aren't you going to answer these charges? And if I were Jesus, I would say, what charges? Because But what do you have to say for yourself? And Jesus says nothing, right? And then the only time Jesus speaks in the home of the high priest is, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And he says, "I am," which is exactly what God called himself.
Way back then.
Yeah,
I am.
I am. Exactly. Moses in the burning bush. So then the high priest tears his clothing. Do we need it? What's with all the clothing taking off?
Maybe it was very hot there.
Maybe. And so you've heard it, blasphemy. So they don't have the authority to really to put him to death. Guilty, they all cry. He deserves to die. Well, they can't do that, as we've mentioned before. So they have accused him of blasphemy, but they can't put him to death. So they take him away, and we have a little interlude here, but the place they take him away to will be Pilate's house. But first, we have to put Peter on trial. And Peter is on trial in the courtyard. Jesus had nothing to say. Peter has way too much to say, right? 3 times. He says, "No way." And so eventually, wait a minute, Rich Johnson has a comment. Perhaps Peter didn't betray Jesus by denying he knew Jesus, as much as he thought he could be more productive by not dying and spreading the word and gospel for many additional years. Well, aren't you very benevolent towards Peter? In fact, that's what Peter does, right? So that is quite an I like it, Rich, that Peter was saving his skin so that he could spread the word. I think that's interesting. Remembering, of course, that they had no idea there was any word to spread yet, because the big moment hadn't happened. At this point, Peter didn't have any gospel really to spread, other than what Jesus had taught him. I get that. Yeah. So then the third trial is Peter before Pilate. Jesus before Pilate. So now it's very early on Friday morning, and they take him directly there. I hope that Pilate had his coffee.
Doesn't sound like it.
So Pilate, so they take him away, and Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Now, there's no clearly the chief priests and the elders all would have had to bring some sort of, all right, this guy, here's what you need to charge him with, right? The reason why Pilate is concerned about this king of the Jews thing is that sedition or treason. And so that would be a punishable by death offense. There's all these unnamed crimes that the chief priests notice. Nothing is very concrete about them. Pilate is very concrete about it. And once again, Jesus has nothing to say. Unlike Peter and unlike the crowds that are about ready to come up, right? Jesus remains quiet. And then Pilate is finally like, all right, well, maybe I'll release. The crowd went to Pilate and asked him to release a prisoner as usual. And I'm thinking Pilate's like, phew, maybe I can get out of this yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, he doesn't even say which one. He just says, how about this one?
Yeah, right.
Because he realizes what's going on. So what's interesting here is Mark is laying the blame for Jesus's death squarely at the feet of the chief priests and the religious leaders. It's on them. Some of the gospel writers put it all on Pilate. Some put it all on Judas.
They say all these charges against him, but there's no charge. Like you said, they never mention what the charges are,
Mm-hmm.
and how many of the charges that the Jews brought would the Romans recognize as a capital offense to begin
Yeah,
with?
blasphemy wouldn't. Yeah, blasphemy wouldn't work, right?
I would think the only thing would be the King of the Jews thing.
Which is why it keeps coming up,
Yeah.
right? And the sign above him, so that over the cross would have they would have written what they were charged with. So that would have been like the charged with, and so in his case, Mark blames the chief priests, the elders, and the religious leaders. Pilate is trying to get out of this. He tries, and then ultimately he hands Jesus over to be flogged in order to pacify the crowds.
But yet, and Pontius Pilate's the only one mentioned in the Apostles' Creed.
Yes.
He gets a rap the whole way along,
Yeah, he does.
forever and ever.
Forever and ever. Yeah. So then we've got the punishment. So first they mock him. So here the royal images come back in again, right? In some ways, Mark set us up for this when Jesus rode in as the king, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mark set us up for all of this. And so now they're going to mock him as a king, and they're going to put a crown of thorns on him. They're going to put a purple robe on him. They're going to give him a scepter, and then they're going to spit on him and mock him. And then they get bored. And so they lead him away to be crucified. The next part of the punishment is carrying your own cross. You have to carry your own cross to your execution. But apparently, while Mark doesn't put in this detail, the only reason that they would force somebody else to carry the cross is if the prisoner was no longer capable of carrying it himself. So they grabbed this Simon of Cyrene. It's fascinating. So he's from pretty far out. Cyrene was a Jewish community. There were about 100,000 Jews living in Cyrene. So even though he's from outside of Israel, he is still inside the covenant. So it's not like he's a Gentile or something. It was an early Christian site, though.
Where is Cyrene?
It is in Libya.
Oh, that's where you said it came from.
Yeah.
That's a fur piece.
It's over in
Past Egypt
northern.
and way beyond.
It's in northern Africa. And it's interesting about this little parenthetical remark there in 21, right? Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus.
Yeah.
We have no idea who these people are,
Right.
but Mark did, and Mark's community did. And tradition holds that they were missionaries
Hmm.
So it seems as though Simon may have gone back since Cyrene became a big Christian community later on. It seems pretty believable then that Simon saw something in this time and was so convinced and went back, and then his sons became missionaries as well.
So that they had the whole Jewish thing down there. Because did they take Jews from there and take to Israel not long ago?
Oh, maybe they did.
There was a
From Libya.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a huge Jewish
Because
community.
they were being persecuted there.
Huh. Interesting. Huh. So you can't help but think of Simon of Cyrene as he takes up this cross. You cannot help but thinking about denying yourself, taking up your cross, and following. And I want you to notice that of all of this, the crucifixion itself is one little short sentence.
After all the big long thing he had before, and he gets this all.
One
Yeah.
short sentence. It reminds me of the birth stories of Jesus. There's all this lead up, and then, and he was born, and they wrapped him in a bands of cloth and laid him in a manger. And that, and then that's that. And you're like, wait, shouldn't there be more? So here, the soldiers nailed him to the cross. That's it. Then they announced the charge against him, the King of the Jews. That's the crime. This is 9:00 in the morning. So now time is really stretched out, right? And then 2 bandits, revolutionaries, this particular translation that I'm looking at calls them. One on his right, one on his left. And everybody is mocking him. Oh, you got the temple, save yourself.
Let them come down and then they'll believe them.
Right, come on down. That's
Now, I wonder why he doesn't say, the one robber defended Jesus and said that he wasn't guilty.
Yeah. Probably because that didn't happen.
Oh, okay.
Remember, who's there?
Yeah, right.
Are any of his disciples there? Nope.
No, they fled.
Nope.
Yeah, they were gone.
Nope. All right. Now we get to the crux of the matter. Oh, it's 8:30. I got to go quick. You know how I've been saying all along that Jesus keeps going, shh, don't tell anyone. Shh, don't tell anyone, right? Nobody says anything about Son of God. Nobody says anything. This is where, for Mark, this is where you know that Jesus is the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
In this moment, when he cries out to God, he dies, and the temple curtain gets torn from top to bottom. In essence, if you remember, there was this holy space back here, this little line. That's the curtain temple curtain. And this is what gets torn. In essence, saying there is no longer a divide There is nothing to keep you from God.
Mm.
You are all now worthy.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow is right, huh? And then the Roman officer who's standing there, the centurion who's standing there, sees how he dies and exclaims, "This man truly was the Son of God." In Mark's gospel, you cannot understand Jesus as Son of God without understanding that he dies. Like to understand Jesus, you must understand that to understand Jesus as God, you must understand that that God dies in this story. Otherwise, you've got it all wrong. If you think that Jesus is a miracle worker, if you think that Jesus is just a king, if you think Jesus is coming to kick butt and take names, if you think that Jesus is just going to skate, you don't understand. For Mark, this is the moment that matters. You can only understand Jesus as Son of God at this moment on the cross. Very quickly, the faithful, the only faithful ones at the end are this band of women who've been following him, right? These people on the fringe, who might they be? They might be the women that he's touched and healed. They could be the demon possessed daughter. Who knows who they are, right? But these are all women, and women are by nature on the fringe of society. So they are, that group of people are the faithful ones, and Joseph of Arimathea, who's a religious leader. It's almost like Mark is saying, okay, don't misunderstand me. They weren't all louses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wonder sometimes if that's not because there were in his own community some upstanding religious leaders, and he just wanted to make sure. And then the only ones who know where he's laid are Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Joseph, whoever he is, and Joseph of Arimathea, unless it is Joseph of Arimathea's mother.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
So for the next time, we'll look at the resurrection narratives, all three different endings, and we'll have a conversation about all three different endings. Good?
Very good.
So sorry that I went a couple of minutes over.
Oh my goodness. I don't think we can stand that. Can you?
Thanks for hanging with me, all of you out there in TV land.
And this has
thank
been
you.
a fun evening. We laughed a lot.
So thank you
We
very
learned
much.
something
Thank you
serious.
all. Remember, no next week. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Just come.
2
to eat.
weeks. You can come and eat with us. Yes, absolutely. 6:30. All right. Goodbye to you all, and we'll see y'all in 2 weeks right here. Bye.
Okay.